Hello, my name is Dr. Becky Morrow, and this presentation is on cats. Are they cuddly companions or cunning killers? And how many birds do they really kill? So cats are very effective hunters, as we know, and many do kill wildlife. How do outdoor cats really impact bird and mammal populations? 29.2 million birds and 57.4 million mammals were estimated to be killed by cats annually in the United Kingdom by Woods et al. 100 million birds killed by free-ranging cats in the United States based on Erickson et al.'s paper. At least 1 billion birds killed by cats every year in the United States, Dauphine and Cooper say. The impact of free-ranging cats on native vertebrates in Virginia was estimated to be over 26 million songbirds and over 78 million small mammals per year by Mitchell and Beck. In another study by Crooks and Soule, each outdoor cat that hunted returned an average of 24 rodents, 15 birds, and 17 lizards each year. And Loss et al. Estimated 1.4 to 3.7 billion birds and 6.9 to 20.7 billion mammals killed annually. And they also stated that unowned cats caused most of this mortality. So we need to look at the science behind these studies and see if what these folks are saying is true. Are cats really decimating the bird population? So what we'll find is that most of the studies on cat predation of birds is really an example of bad science. Some of the examples that were found in the papers that were just referenced included flawed estimates of birds and mammals that were killed by cats due to poorly done studies, also referencing the American Bird pamphlet as well as Cats Indoors initiative as part of their argument. And of course that would be considered sources that were biased and also not rigorous peer-reviewed publications. Data was relying on cat owners to report, in some cases, not just the number of birds or mammals, but also proper species designation. There were some studies that really demonstrated the lack of scientific rigor by using phraseology such as our best guesses at and estimates of the birds. They have also extrapolated what I'll call loosely data from non-scientific, non-peer-reviewed articles in trade journals, and these also lacked methods sections, so you could not assess the methodology behind collecting of the data. There is certainly much bias, as I previously mentioned, against cats in favor of wildlife because the organizations that were funding the studies or providing resources to do the studies were bird conservatory organizations and such. So they also assumed many things. We don't really know how many cats are free roaming. One article assumed that there were 117 to 157 million cats. And that's quite a difference in those two numbers as well. There was neglect to indicate how data were obtained in some other articles. There was no evidence as to the number of cats that were included in the study, number of owners surveyed, and if the data were collected prospectively or retrospectively. So that's going to be a big deal based on recollection of previous years' predation of an owned cat, or actually doing this in a prospective manner where you would find much more accurate numbers. And there was a very flawed determination of kill rates with a very large range in one study of 4 to 54 birds per cat per year. So that is going to be more than tenfold difference in those numbers. And my favorite was that one study extrapolated from 5 cats, so n equals 5, and out-of-date estimates of 1 cat per 5.9 humans to get this astronomical number of birds and mammals killed in the state of Virginia. And we do see not only those articles that I mentioned in the beginning, but books on the subject. So the article that I already mentioned earlier by Loss et al. Included this author, Peter Mara, and this individual is an ornithologist, and he is certainly very biased against cats because he believes them to be this killer of massive numbers of birds in the United States and throughout the world. So this is another example of bad science, and I have some specific examples of that in the next slides. And it was in Nature Communications, which is a top-tier journal, somehow got accepted with all of these concerns that I will point out. And I wanted to also mention this from Vox Felina, certainly a tertiary literature, if you can call that, resource. But this just makes a really simple point that North American bird populations have declined by about 29% since 1970, according to data that we have, a loss of nearly 3 billion birds. So that leaves us about 7 billion birds. 6 years ago, this article comes out that we can see, impact of free-ranging domestic cats on wildlife, and the paper estimated that outdoor cats kill 1.3 to 4 billion birds annually, and that leaves us to believe, if we do the math, that this one source of mortality, these cats, are responsible for killing more than half of the continent's bird population every year. So if you look at those data in context, it does seem rather ridiculous. So this paper, again by Loss, Will, and Mara, is very flawed. They based estimates on their cat predation model. So that model was using estimates of cat predation rates on birds and other wildlife, as well as national estimates of total numbers of owned and unowned cats. They actually separated those two groups. Proportion of owned cats that were outdoors, and the proportion of cats hunting. As you can see, I pointed out that there were 3 surveys, and again, surveys not being the most accurate or precise data, based in 1997, which is rather dated, and 5 studies total that were representing the proportion of cats hunting. Now, what they did well, in my opinion, is that they did exclude certain studies from determination of predation rates, those that had an abnormally high predation rate, whatever that is intended to mean. Hopefully they did some statistical analyses and looked for outliers and so forth. They excluded the studies with fewer than 10 cats, which I would have probably considered a different number, but at least they did look at that. They also excluded questionnaires that were asking people to recall previous predation events, so these retrospective studies were not included due to lack of remembering accurately what their cats brought home to them. And they also excluded small island studies because these are going to have very different predation rates as compared to mainland. There are examples of birds being naive to introduced cats because of their not being native species. They are very easily caught because they have no reason to be wary of these creatures, and they are going to have a massive predation rate in that situation, perhaps. So of the studies that they used for the cat predation model, only 14 were done in the United States. They did include 28 other studies from Europe, New Zealand, and Australia, and they did include that based on the reason that they were also in a temperate zone. So unfortunately, even after looking just at a small portion of the references that Loss et al. Used in their paper to build this cat predation model, many discrepancies were found. The first regards the data on predation rates. They used 3 studies that did not have any data that could predict predation rates to do so. For instance, the Eberd study was based on stomach contents of 121 cats at a single point in time. So just checking what cats ate at one point in time would not allow one to calculate a rate of predation. Another one of the studies, Hawkins et al., used fecal samples that there was no verification that they were actually from cats, and they looked for rodent hairs and feathers. So again, there's no way to determine any predation rates. So even if we thought the predation rates were okay and were accurate, there were major inconsistencies in the references used to determine the proportion of owned cats outdoors and the proportion of cats hunting. In this case, there were some mathematical errors in the Kays and Dewan study that did not give the same rate that Loss et al. Reported in their study. There was a discrepancy in the numbers. Based on the data, there would have been percentage of cats hunting outside as 39.6%, but for some reason, Loss et al. Got a 50% rate from that same study. Another reference they used, Fiore, was a thesis that had many inadequacies. Predation of birds by cats was measured based on birds brought home by 41 cats that were included in the study. 29 of the cats were reported to have killed birds, which is 71%. And the problem was that for households with multiple cats, they alternated kills between cats if the owner didn't know which cat was responsible for the kill. So that actually led to a possible rate of 61% if the 5 cats who were not observed hunting were in fact non-hunters. So that was a discrepancy. Also, having only n equals 41 and extrapolating that to the entire population of free-roaming cats in the United States is not going to be very representative. Loss et al. Listed their owned cat hunting rate as 83% based on these numbers, and that doesn't even fit based on the math that was done in this study. They consistently cited resources that were not from the primary literature, but were from the American Bird Conservatory and the Wisconsin Natural Resources magazine. It's really puzzling that the article that they cited from Coleman et al. In 1997 doesn't say a thing about percentage of unowned cats hunting. If they did accidentally list that instead of another study by Coleman and Temple from 1993, we still don't see unowned cats data, just free-ranging cats that were farm cats. So really, again, this is just a few examples of a handful of their references that were checked showing major discrepancies and not supporting their data or their conclusions in any way. So due to these huge problems, it's really not likely to be a reliable indicator of any impact cats have on wildlife. The statement that unowned cats account for most wildlife mortality is also not supported by their manuscript or the data that we have at this point in time. So how do outdoor cats impact bird and mammal populations? We really don't have the answers yet. And these biased, poorly conducted, and improperly interpreted studies are providing wrong answers. That's not helping. These dubiously generated estimates of bird kills by domestic cats are then being used to describe the actions of feral cats in order to deter communities from using TNR as a method of population control. We really need more reliable and objective scientific studies to address the impact of cats on wildlife. Although Loss et al. Do not differentiate the species of birds and mammals that are killed in their manuscript, they do state something that I would agree with. Assessing the conservation importance of a mortality source requires identification of which species are being killed. Yes, because there are invasive species such as house sparrows and starlings that perhaps conservationists would be much less concerned with if they were removed from the ecosystem as compared to other songbirds. Also, mammals consumed by cats may represent species considered to be pests in the eyes of humans, and this may be a plus to some humans, being that there's a reason people have barn cats to control rodent populations, and also it can help to help control some infectious diseases and zoonoses. What else we can do in the future is design studies that will minimize bias and really can give us some real answers here. Having all of these studies that provide dramatically different estimates that are based on flawed data is not helping anyone. This is just going to play into the controversy and the inflammatory rhetoric that's driving people to condemn feral cats and other community cats. Yes, we know cats do kill wildlife. That is a thing, but we need to find out for real what the impact is. So we really need more data on the cat's behavior. So this would be a great way to get better predation rates to find the behavior of cats, and also various regions of the United States should be considered. These extrapolations from a handful of cats to the entire country are certainly not helping us. So we need some objective data on what free-roaming cats are eating as well, rather than just owner reports, surveys, and other methodologies that will allow the subjectiveness of interpretation to come into play. And then in addition, we certainly could use other research to help decrease the outdoor cat population, finding more data on targeted trap neuter return, as well as the impact on colony size, and also maybe non-surgical sterilization methods, researching into non-surgical sterilization and other humane methods of population control as well. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation. And remember, we're all on the same side when it comes to decreasing cat overpopulation.